Welcome to the People Experience Pulse podcast, your gateway to the new frontier of human experiences at work. On the PX Pulse, we're all about elevating experiences, fostering belonging, and building remarkable workplace cultures in a fast evolving world.
All right, welcome back. It's good to be with everyone again. Today, we're going to talk about navigating difficult conversations in the workplace. I'm with my partner, Vicki, who's the best executive coach I know over culture, conflict, and communication. How's it going, Vicki?
It is going well. I'm excited about this topic because, it's not like we need this today, right?
Yes. Do you realize, all right, so we knew each other a long time ago. We met at an event, and I thought you were an amazing facilitator. But the very first podcast we ever did, where you were a guest on my show, we talked about managing conflict in the workplace. Do you remember that?
Yes, that's right. Oh my gosh. Wow. Time flies too fast.
Right. And that inspired me so much. And you really are such a great person to help navigate difficult, complex conflict in organizations and helping really navigate leaders in the right directions. There's no better person to talk to about this.
Thank you. Wow. Making my whole week.
Well, the one thing I've always been very clear on is when you avoid difficult conversations, conflict gets worse. It gets driven underground. It's never addressed. So I think healthy conflict, as Patrick Lencioni says in his books, is so incredibly important to avoid tensions rising, and it's up to the leader to either escalate or to diffuse them.
Yeah, for sure. And I want to remind all our listeners out there that we are speaking from primarily a U.S. perspective, but that we recognize that there are a lot of differences around the world. Different cultures handle conflict differently. And so we will kind of address that from time to time, but just know that we are aware of that, and we'll throw that in there when we're able to.
Absolutely. You could pick up any book and read a great nugget of wisdom and try to apply that in a business, even from a U.S. perspective, because there's so many cultures represented in the U.S., and it never goes as perfectly as it sounds in the book. So we'll absolutely keep that lens and perspective. But I know that we've talked in the last episode a lot about psychological safety and trust as a key to effective conversations. And I think that's important to touch on here too, because if it's not safe in an environment to have an honest or a candid conversation, then you're never really going to get to that point of being able to manage conflict in the first place.
That's really true, because I'm all about open and direct resolution to conflict, but I still feel that way, that there are people in my life that I wouldn't necessarily feel safe to do so with, as opposed to you, where I could say anything and I know it's going to resolve itself, even if it's, something challenging to bring up. So you're right. Yeah. And personality style has a lot to do with that too, that some people are naturally just more direct and comfortable with that, and others are just naturally not. And that can bring some difficulty in and of itself, because you don't want people to be too forced in terms of, forcing themselves to be in open conflict when that's genuinely not their personality style. It's genuinely uncomfortable. But at the same time, we need ways to resolve things between human beings. So it's a tricky balance.
It is tricky. I think that's why ongoing leadership development within organizations to build those unique leadership skill sets, but also with their unique leadership styles, there's really not a one size fits all. To be a people first leader, you have to allow space for people to be their authentic selves. But I think when you don't have a leader that's empowered to create psychological safety, trust, to be able to manage conflict, you kind of get into some common avoidance patterns that are really terrible for the culture, in my opinion. And that's, people are either silent, they avoid conflict entirely, they're aggressive or passive aggressive, and they kind of shut down the dialogue, or they're just compliant and they agree to avoid conflict, but it kind of fosters resentment. And then there's this underlying tension. And so none of those three things are good for an organization.
Yeah, and I think this is a good place to point out that, again, there are cultural differences around that. Then in one culture, silence might be a reflection strategy as opposed to avoidance. Nevertheless, especially when you have cross-cultural teams, it can still be a challenge. And, a lot of times I'll give my clients assessments that will show their communication style differences between like themselves and another leader or themselves and a team member. And just the awareness of those differences can make all the difference. Because if you don't know that there are different styles in conflict, then you see your style as, the good way, the normal way, the best way, and the other person's as the wrong way. But if you're aware that there are those differences, it might still be challenging, but you have a better chance of navigating your way through that. But I agree with you. I've seen all three of those play out in very negative ways. My personal sort of one that I think does the most damage is compliance, like agreeing to avoid conflict, but fostering resentment inside. It tends to build up and then sometimes it's worse. I don't know. What do you notice in your work?
I mean, I've noticed it very specifically in working with global organizations that, have a lot of great aspirational goals, and they talk a good game in terms of building a global mindset and embracing cross-cultural competency. But when it comes to the compliance and not actually addressing the conflict, particularly amongst the leaders who have the boots on the ground in all the different regions of the world, the kind of finger on the pulse, so to speak, they that really leads to this overarching theme of compliance, and you never really get past that layer, that barrier to progress within that organization. So we've seen that hands on in our work.
Yes, we have. Fairly recently, actually. Yeah, and it unfortunately, like you've mentioned in a couple of other episodes, it really sets the tone for the rest of the team members. If the leaders can't get past that and they can't find healthy ways to address their own conflicts, it does trickle down. And sometimes in this kind of intangible way, but you can just feel it in the air. And people don't even know, why do I not feel good showing up to work? Why do I not feel good when I see this leader on my calendar or whatever, like I'm going to have a meeting with them and I feel a sense of dread. Why is that? And they can't even identify why, but that's what happens when these things build up.
That's right. And I love how you always look through the lens of cultural nuance, because a lot of this is culturally influenced, and you have to consider the global mindset and start shifting that to that reality, because that's the way our world is now, in terms of our interconnectedness and our distributed teams. But difficult conversations are opportunities for trust building. They're not threats. I know it's hard as a people first leader to have these, but the reality is, on the other side, there's so much more opportunity when you address it head on and consider the cultural influence within it and how you approach it.
Yeah, and I love that you use the word "and" there because that's what it's all about. Addressing a difficult conversation might not happen in the way that you're used to in your culture, but it can still be addressed. So a lot of times I'll tell our clients like, "Hey, just offer multiple different channels for people to express concerns. Don't just expect people to bring it up in a public environment like a meeting because in some cultures that's not acceptable." But maybe you give that as one option, but you also have an anonymous email address where people can send concerns or suggestions. Maybe you have an anonymous survey. Maybe you have a one-on-one meeting that follows the public meeting. If you give people multiple channels through which they can express the concerns, then that can often encompass some of those cultural differences, but you still get to address the issues.
So how do you approach difficult conversations? What are some things that, if you're about to walk into either a town hall or an Ask Me Anything or a one-on-one, what are some things that leaders can do to be prepared for that?
I think one of the things that's important to know is, what is the goal of the conversation? What is the outcome you actually want? Because sometimes people lead difficult conversations with reactive emotion. They're upset about something and therefore they want to have a difficult conversation or they feel forced to. But that's not the ultimate goal of the conversation. If you play it out further, the goal would be something more productive, like you want to figure out how to do a process better. You want to figure out how a mistake happened and make sure that there's accountability and adaptability for the future. Whatever the goal is, be clear on that before you walk in. And kind of what goes along with that is, a lot of times when we're in the reactive state, our brain will automatically leap to a bunch of assumptions about the person or the situation. Whereas when we sit down and say, okay, what is the goal What's the outcome we want? And then we lead into that with curiosity. So ask questions. Don't just jump into the conversation and accuse, because that will, you know, in conflict management, like attracts like. So if you come in yelling or you come in with an accusation, it's going to draw more of the same. And kind of similarly to that, we do need to be in touch with our own emotions if we're going to have successful, difficult conversations. Because if the other person is frustrated with you, you don't necessarily have to mirror that back. You can say, all right, tell me what's going on, and listen. Because again, like attracts like in conflict. So you don't have to mirror that emotion. But you can, as a leader, you can set the tone. And you could say things like, we have this shared goal we're trying to get to here. And you can reinforce that and reinforce the fact that there's respect in the situation and that there's a shared outcome you both want or you both need. And that usually goes a lot better.
That's really sage advice. And I will tell you, it's a struggle,
Yes, it
especially
is.
not mirroring the frustration. I've been there many times in my career. And yes, that is a good sage tip and also difficult at the same time. I fully acknowledge. So de-escalation techniques, I think, is something you're so good at, and really understanding the power of active listening. And in this preparation, I love what you said about preparing kind of like the questions that you would ask versus the things you want to say at somebody, because it comes from that place of curiosity, and maybe the outcome is totally different than what you expected or assumed. And so having those questions at the ready and coming at it from a place of curiosity is so key. But tell me a little bit more about kind of responding versus reacting and some of the tools that you've taught me about that.
So one of my absolute favorites kind of speaks to what you said about it's a nice aspirational goal to have these, very successful, difficult conversations, but it's not easy. It's the human brain. Again, we're not programmed, like we talked about in our last episode. Our brain is programmed to skew negative. So it makes sense why people struggle with this. But my favorite tool is called the 4-second rule. And I heard about this from a researcher named Peter Bregman, I believe I'm getting his name right. And he talked about some research at Columbia that said that if you pause between 1.5 and 2 seconds before you say something challenging, it gives your brain time for the chemistry of your brain to move from the lower reactive part of the brain to the higher part of the brain, which is the part that is good at reasoning. And so he said, be a little more conservative and give it 4 seconds.
Yeah,
So
bat
if
it.
you pause 4 seconds before you say something difficult, and I can tell you from experience, I've used this like 100 times, and it really is effective. And if people are worried about being silent during that 4 seconds, you can actually just say, you know what, I need a second, or let me think about that for a minute. And that way you're not just leaving the person wondering why you're not saying anything for 4 whole seconds. But it gives your brain that time. And the other tip I'll give folks that has worked for me, I don't know when this hasn't worked, is the statement, tell me more. So if you need time to just gather your emotions, or, they're saying something accusatory, there's usually something more behind it. There's a need or an emotion behind it that's not being addressed. So the phrase, tell me more, has been effective 100% of the time with me. But I don't know, what about you? Have you noticed these things work for you, or?
I was going to say, tell me more, but you just asked me the question. So I've seen you do it a million times and it works great. And I agree with you. When you yield to more depth in what they're feeling and what they are trying to convey, and you honor them by asking that follow-up question, it really strengthens the relationship. And to me, in the workplace, anywhere you go, really, it's all about relationships that are healthy or relationships that are broken or that are on the fritz. And so how do you find great ways to repair and restore that relationship, and honoring them in that way with that simple question makes a huge fundamental difference.
It really does. And the other thing I'll share with listeners that has made a huge difference, and I've used this to talk about stuff like COVID vaccines and the politics situation, I mean, really hot button topics, is just acknowledging that you have heard somebody. So
Yes.
when they say something and you feed it back, like, yeah, you're saying that this, and you just kind of recap what they said, or even validating one part. Maybe you don't agree with part A, but you agree with part B, and you can just validate
Yeah.
that part. Like, I agree that this is a mess right now.
Yes, it is.
That step
Well,
alone, oh my gosh, I can't tell you how effective that's been.
yeah. If there's one takeaway from this episode, just tell me more.
Yeah,
Just
exactly.
put that on your sticky note on your computer today.
That's right.
But I do want to just share real quickly, because I know we're coming up on our time, the practical framework you shared with me on AAPP, which is acknowledge, agree, pivot, and perspective.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that acronym? Because that would be another kind of quick, simple framework that people could use.
Yeah. And this is actually kind of a tricky little thing that does require some practice. So if you want to know more about it, definitely contact us, peoplefirstellevation.com. But the acronym AAPP, think of it like an app for your difficult conversations. And it stands for acknowledge, so validating emotions and concerns that people have. Agree, which is finding some tiny point of agreement in what they said, even if it's just agreeing that the situation is a mess. First P is for pivot, and that is giving people a signal that you're about to share your perspective. So it's something like, can I share my perspective on this? Or, this hits close to home for me. Can I share my thoughts on that? It's like turning on your car turn signal and then sharing your perspective. But that's the trick, is you've got to share your perspective, not some universal truth that you think that the other person is wrong because you're universally right. It's your perspective. And you can even use that phrase, in my perspective, this is what's happening. Or from my experience, this is what I see. And you don't have to water down your opinion but just sharing it from your own perspective. So again, this is not a super easy trick to implement like the 4-second rule. But if you want to know more about it, you can contact us, and it is highly effective.
I agree.
Yeah.
Super helpful, Vicki. Well, one encouragement I want to give is trust is built in the tough moments. Don't shy away from them. Hopefully some of these practical tips were helpful to you today. Just remember that open dialogue strengthens, not weakens teams. Being a leader that shows up and sparks these kinds of conversations is healthy within an organization, so long as you continue to build your cross-cultural competency and understanding that it's not the same for all, to Vicki's point, is so important. And really, if a workplace values the word respect, which you shared earlier, Vicki, and understanding, difficult conversations just have to be part of the culture. Don't you agree?
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if I've ever shared this with you, but the Latin root of the word respect is respectare, which literally means to look again. So it's so important for people to keep looking again and again. Don't make assumptions. Just keep asking questions, keep looking again, and that's where you'll find respect.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Again, we hope this was helpful. I'd ask that you just reflect this week. How can you model this in your leadership? And we hope that as a people first leader, you continue to feel empowered to go out there and lead out front. Thank you for your time today.
Take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another insightful episode of the People Experience Pulse. We hope the words shared in this episode have inspired you as much as they've inspired us. Now the real challenge begins, putting what you've learned into practice. The change you create, no matter how small, could be the spark that ignites an exceptional people experience in your organization and beyond. If you found value in today's conversation, we'd greatly appreciate it if you took a moment to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Your feedback helps us deliver high-value content and reach more listeners like you. You can find other inspiring episodes and additional resources at our website, thepxpulse.com. Join our community at thepxpulse.com. Thank you again for joining us on the People Experience Pulse. Until next time, remember, the heartbeat of any organization is its people. Let's make every pulse count.